use like fruit metaphors, and they're usually a metaphor for something that has to do with the body. When a male author can write about girlhood in a really authentic way, it's really refreshing, and I feel like he does. I don't know that I've ever been as shocked by a last line. It literally makes you rethink the entire novel. What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video. So I have kind of a fun one today. I have never done a like short books recommendation type of video on my channel as far as I can recall, and I thought it would be really interesting just to see like what books specifically that I could recommend that are like under 200 pages, like from different genres completely. And I thought it would be really interesting to kind of see like, well, what books would I recommend that would help somebody get out of a reading slump. So that is what I have for you today. I'm pretty excited. Of the 10 that I'm going to recommend, I have 8 of them physically on my shelf. I have some really good ones. These were all read within the last couple of years and at least have like a 4-star rating. Some of them are even a 5-star rating. I'm not going to go in any particular order. I'm just going to grab off the top of the stack, and hopefully these will help you get out of a reading slump, because I know that sucks. I know that feeling, and it's so annoying of like reading book after book after book, thinking like eventually something is going to come along and grip you. And sometimes it just takes a really short, quick book where the writing is it kind of has to be very like specific and economical, because it's a short book. And so these all did that for me. Every sentence feels purposeful. So let's dive into it. Right off the top of the stack is one that I actually read recently. I think it was just this past year, a couple of months ago, for my Reading Around the World challenge. So this was originally published in Taiwan. Oh, this has been around for a while. Okay. This was originally published in 1996. That's when the copyright date is, but then it was translated into English just a couple of years ago in 2021. Anyway, this is The Membranes by Tai Wei. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Absolutely fascinating. Not what I was expecting. It has probably the most curviest curveball of a plot twist that I never would have guessed. I would be very surprised if you guessed the plot twist in this. Like, I would be shocked. I probably wouldn't believe you, to be completely honest. This is fascinating. This takes place in the future. And humanity has sort of migrated under the sea, under the ocean, into these little domes because of like global warming and the sun heating up and the earth getting really warm. And so we're following a main character in the late 21st century. Her name is Momo. There's just so much in this. It's science fiction, but I almost don't want to say that, because I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of science fiction, and I don't want that to put you off of this, because it's very subtle. There's not a lot of world building. I think there's a couple of paragraphs in one of the early chapters kind of describing why and how humanity exists now below the sea. It is definitely about mother-daughter relationships. There's a fraught mother-daughter relationship kind of at the center of this. We go back in time and we see some things that have happened in the past, some trauma that's happened in the past, and then but we're rooted in the present as well. This was a 5-star, and I don't give 5 stars out lightly. So this is definitely one to check out if any of that sounds remotely interesting to you. Next up, I'll quickly mention another one that's sort of kind of categorized as like science fiction. It's technically in a subcategory or like a subgenre called solarpunk, which is like new to me. I'm familiar with that term at all until I read this book. This is actually the sequel. So the one that I'm going to recommend is the first one, which is A Psalm for the Wild Built. I remember when this came out a couple of years ago, it was in a lot of people's like top books of the year, and for good reason. Super short. I want to say these are like barely over 100 pages, 150 pages, something like that. And they're just so cozy. There's the 2 main characters. One of them is a robot and one of them is a monk, and it's set in sort of like an alternative universe where monks are kind of traveling out and they just have like tea with people, and they kind of are like traveling therapists. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like post-robot apocalypse, like post-robot takeover. It's not post-apocalyptic. It's not dark at all. It's actually really, really cozy. It's just so heartwarming. So again, if you're not a fan of like science fiction, don't let that kind of put you off, because these books are not like that at all. So that one is absolutely fascinating. The first one's great, and then I loved the sequel just as much. The sequel is A Prayer for the Crown Shy. The second one didn't disappoint. There's only 2 of them. It's just a duology. You can get through them honestly probably in like one sitting each. Short chapters, they're just... I want to read more by Becky Chambers, honestly. I feel like I started off really strong with these 2 because these were the first that I ever read by her, and it just makes me want to read all of her stuff. She has a 4-book series called the Wayfarers series that I also think is science fiction, so those are definitely on my TBR. I feel like it's rare to get sort of a post-apocalyptic kind of story where there's like, it feels very hopeful and like there's hope for humanity. A lot of people tend to go really dark, and she doesn't. It's so light and airy and fun and hopeful. So these, highly recommend. Those were a 5-star for sure. I'm gonna keep going with some of the more like hopeful, lighthearted ones, and then we can maybe kind of dive into some of the darker kind of like horror vibe ones here in a little bit. Next is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This had its moment on the internet. It probably really needs no introduction, to be completely honest. I'm obsessed. I just finished Earthlings by her as well, which will be in my March wrap-up. But this is about a young woman who seems to be, like, maybe she's on the spectrum, maybe she's autistic, or maybe she's just very different. Sayaka Murata's main characters are always just a little bit left of center. Her commentary on not wanting the things that society shoves down your throat. So like not wanting a family, not wanting, you know, children, like being totally content and perfectly fine in her convenience store job. It says she finds peace and purpose in her daily tasks, but there's a pressure on her to pursue a career, to find a husband, and she feels forced to take desperate action in order to please the people around her instead of herself. And I feel like that is a universal pressure that like we all feel, and so I just don't know how you would not relate to this book. And it's just, it's weird and wonderful. It's one of those kind of just like slice of life little meditations on, you know, a particular topic. And in this case, it's like the societal pressure that we all feel to like fit in, or she's just not normal. And I feel like we all kind of feel that way. We're just like weird in our own separate special ways. It's hard to describe it and make it sound as good as it is, but it is quite wonderful. And this one was originally published in Japanese. If you are doing a similar challenge to me, like the Reading Around the World challenge that I'm doing, then this would check the box for Japan. Next up is a Canadian novel. This was incredibly controversial at the time. I think this originally came out in the late 70s. 1976 is when it first was published. I have read this a couple of times now, and that is Bear by Marian Engel. One of you even commented recently that you'd read it and you were like, yeah, that's not what I was expecting at all. It's really fascinating. We have a main character named Lou, and she's like basically like a librarian. She works in like maybe the city hall. She does a very like dry, boring job where she like looks at documents and stuff all day. And then a man in town passes away, and he had a huge home library, and so she's given the opportunity to go to his house on like one of the islands. It's kind of isolated, and to like catalog his library, like organize everything. And while she's there, she's told, oh, by the way, there's a bear chained up in like the shed in the back, and you're gonna need to go out there and like feed him and make sure he has water. She eventually gets quite comfortable with the bear and like lets him off his chain, and he ends up even like coming into the house sometimes. And it is essentially about her and the bear's relationship. It's quite an intimate relationship. So this one's just fascinating. It's just so weird. Again, it's kind of like about a woman who is just living a life that's very non-traditional and kind of different from what society would expect her to do. The bear kind of brings her to life in a sense. So this one is just, again, it feels, there's something kind of cozy about it. It takes place in the summertime. She goes like on swims with the bear. Again, kind of slightly left of center, not exactly what you're going to be expecting. So that is Bear. Now getting into some of the kind of weirder, darker stuff. We have Omnivores by Lydia Millett. This was a finalist for a Pulitzer. And I can see why. It was very different. This one's a little bit closer to 200 pages. It's about 190. I'm just gonna read the blurb on this one. This one, it's been a while since I've read it. I remember absolutely loving it, but it's just, I'll have to read the blurb for you. In a claustrophobic, surreal California house, teenager Estee lives with her domineering father, whose obsession with insect taxonomy bleeds into sadism. As his schemes multiply, Estee's bedridden mother, entranced by the glow of the shopping channel, remains oblivious to the escalating chaos. Estee manages to escape her childhood home, only to find new horrors awaiting her in marriage and motherhood. In a climactic twist, her traumas take form in flesh and blood, a legacy of the insatiable male appetites that have haunted her life. This one I remember getting really weird at the end as well. So it kind of explains, like, she escapes some of the trauma that's happening in her childhood home, and but then just kind of finds new trauma in her new life, like with her husband, and I think she has a child at one point. I remember it getting really wild and weird, but also wonderful at the same time, and just kind of like not exactly what you would expect. There was almost, and I could be wrong, kind of a magical realism sort of vibe to it by the end. Yeah, it's one of those novels that it starts out like seemingly normal, like pretty normal, and then it just slowly kind of untangles and gets a little bit weirder and weirder and weirder as time goes on. This one's also not like super new. It came out in the 90s. I think she was commenting on the time about like men and men in power and abuse of power, whether that be like on a macro scale with like corporations and like CEOs running corporations, but also like a micro scale of like the home, like the domestic world, and men kind of being domineering in that sense. So it feels a little bit feminist at times. I loved it. I thought it was really great. And then in that same year, one of my favorite novels of all time was published, and that is Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club. I'm gonna mention this even though it is over 200 pages, just barely, because if you have somehow managed to not have this spoiled for you, if you haven't read the book, if you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend Fight Club. Now, you can't really have a queasy stomach with Palahniuk. I did a whole video on him. This is just diabolical. It's his debut, and I honestly feel like it's so good that everything that came after that has just been like slightly less impressive. But wow, what a book. I feel like it encapsulates a lot of what men in the 90s were feeling, just culturally in society. I feel like it kind of like captures a moment in time. There is like a Fight Club 2 and a Fight Club 3 and maybe even a fourth, but they're graphic novels. It's just a book that you just can't forget. Like, there's something so disturbing about it and so weird. And then that twist that I was not expecting. So yes, read it for the twist, enjoy it for all the weird wonderfulness that it is. I have read it twice and I'm not a rereader, so I feel like that says something. If I reread a book, that means it's like really good. So yeah, Fight Club is just one of those. It's almost like, I feel like it's almost like a modern classic. Like, it just had such a moment. It was so explosive. Obviously Brad Pitt and Edward Norton helped that, I think, the popularity of the book, because the movie came out in 99. It really is one of those books that I couldn't put it down. Like, it's just, you just rip through it so fast, because it's just so wildly entertaining. So this is one of my only 5-star reads, so definitely check it out if you haven't already. Now getting into a few that are a little bit darker, a little bit sadder, still weird. I feel like that's kind of been the vibe of all of these, is like they're all kind of weird. So the next two are both Norwegian novels that have been translated into English, and so I read both of them for my Reading Around the World challenge, and have loved them both dearly. So this is The Ice Palace by Tarjei Vesaas. I'm probably butchering his name, although I do love his author photo with his kitty. I think it's freaking adorable. Anyway, this takes place on the Norwegian fjords, and we have two girls who become very fast friends, like freakishly fast. They meet and then almost immediately have this connection and then are separated. So one of the girls is like from out of town, and she wants to go kind of explore the big waterfall, like the big famous frozen waterfall, and she gets lost. She gets kind of like trapped inside. It's basically a novel of grief, essentially, because then we have the other girl who like just made this connection. Now all of a sudden it's gone. And so it's like her grappling with that, and they're like, I think supposed to be preteens, so they're just very young. And I don't know, it's like, I love when when a male author can write about girlhood in a really authentic way. It's really refreshing, and I feel like he does. It's so beautiful. I was reading this when it was snowing outside, and I think I described the writing as like a snowflake. Like, you appreciate each snowflake when you see one up close for all the little intricacies and the uniqueness of it. And I felt like that's what his writing style is too, like the way that he describes the snow and the ice and the landscape. It's just so pure and beautiful. Barely over 100 pages. It almost feels like an old folk tale, but like a modern retelling. It's not, but it kind of has that sort of vibe to it. Like the story, something about it feels kind of old. A lot about friendship. And not just between the two girls, but the way that then the girl who survived kind of isolates herself from her other friends, and then them trying to connect back. It's a really beautiful novel, and I do recommend it. And then also for Norway is, I think, Jenny Haval, I could be saying her name wrong, Paradise Rots. So this is, I want to say, her first novel. And it's a horror novel. It's described as a heady, hypersensual portrayal of sexual awakening and queer desire. This one is just under 150 pages. I just read this one like last week, and I really liked it. She has a couple more that I want to read, and she's a musician. I didn't know that before I found her. I don't remember if I stumbled across her like on Pinterest or something. Loved this. It has kind of a similar vibe in the beginning to Fight Club, because if you've read Fight Club, you know that the two male main characters stay in like an abandoned house that's like literally falling apart. It's leaking. So this also takes place in actually a warehouse that was like converted into sort of an apartment. It's like barely livable. There's something that she does with sound in this novel that's so interesting, because it's like you can hear everything. You can hear, she feels like she can hear like the beetles crawling in the walls, every single thing that she and her roommate are doing, even if they're like across the warehouse from each other, they can still hear every little thing. Like, she feels like she can hear like every little brush of fabric against skin. So it feels very like weirdly intimate in that way, because I feel like you can hear this book almost like ASMR. I don't know if I'm describing it very well at all, but so she and this roommate get very close because they sort of have to in this house just to stay warm. So it feels very, very intimate, but also isolating at the same time. It feels like when they step into the warehouse, like that setting in the book feels like otherworldly. It feels like it is separate from the rest of the town. There are some pretty gross descriptions. The most beautiful, interesting thing that she does is like metaphors of like rotting fruit, and the way that she's describing them as like a body. Like, she'll use the metaphor of rotting fruit to describe flesh, or vice versa. So if you like body horror, this is sort of light body horror, just a quiet horror novel. If you just want sort of like that dark, creepy, sticky, rotten sort of vibe in a book, then this one is probably for you. And then going along with that, one of my favorite, it's either a short story or a novella. It's very short. It's called The Beauty by Aaliyah Whiteley. It's so, so good. It's that same kind of vibe as Paradise Rot. You have essentially like a body horror novella. So the plot with that one is we have a like womb disease that has essentially wiped out all of the women on Earth. So our group of main characters are like the last generation of men, basically. And so the plot kicks off when the men realize that the mass graves where they've had to bury all of the women are sprouting these weird yellow mushrooms. And I almost don't want to say anything more than that, because if I say anything else, I feel like it's gonna spoil it. It's very weird. It's one of my favorite short stories of all time, though. I love it. It's so, so good. It's so weird. The way that it makes you think about like death and gender and fruit and mushrooms is just, it's very interesting. I love it. I'm obsessed with it. I think it's actually mentioned on the back of one of these other books by Aaliyah Whiteley. You can kind of see it there. There's From the Neck Up, which has kind of features some of those same yellow mushrooms on the cover of The Beauty. This is short stories, similar kind of vibe, very uncanny. So that's From the Neck Up. And then she also has a slim novel here called The Loosening Skin. And this one's really interesting. It's about a girl who molts. And when she kind of sloughs off the dead skin, she like everything about her kind of goes with it, like her memories and like who she is as a person. Aaliyah Whiteley, just in general, I really love her stuff. The Beauty is the one that I recommend though, for sure. Like and again, it's one that I've reread. It's very like Vandermeer-esque. I would love if they did, whoever like produced and directed the Annihilation movie with Natalie Portman, I feel like that would be such a good movie if they expanded The Beauty into a like full-length feature film. And then one more that I want to mention, if you again have a strong stomach, then you might be able to handle this one. It's by Augustina Bazterrica, I think that's how you say her name. Tender is the Flesh. I freaking loved that book. It's so good. It's a little over 200 pages, like just a few pages over, and it's about cannibalism. If you think that's something that you can stomach, go for it. I loved it. I actually have another one of hers. She's got, if you'd rather do short stories, she has this short story collection, which this cover I'm obsessed with, 19 Claws and a Blackbird. I did not love this as much as Tender is the Flesh. That's my favorite of hers, but this is also out there if you're more of a short story kind of person. But yeah, Tender is the Flesh is one that it makes you think a lot about going vegan or going vegetarian. If I wasn't already, that book may have convinced me. People are talked about like cattle. Like there's literally a scene where they go into like a market and there's like just a foot wrapped in plastic and it's labeled like lower extremity, and you can like buy literally a human foot to eat. And I don't know that I've ever been as shocked by a last line of a book as much as I was with Tender is the Flesh. It literally makes you rethink the entire novel because it changes the way that you feel about some of the characters in an instant. Like it's insane. Like I don't know that I've ever read a more impactful final line from a book than that one. I mean, that's just like, it's crazy. I don't know how she did it. It's fascinating. Dark, creepy, gross, but absolutely wonderful. Definitely check your content warnings on that one because there are some scenes where, like I said, humans are literally treated as cattle, and it gets pretty dark, so just beware that one is going to be pretty intense. If you can read Pollinick, if you can stomach Pollinick, then you can stomach Tender is the Flesh. But yeah, super disturbing. So if you want to be disturbed, read that one. And I think that is everything. I think I actually mentioned a few more than 10. So hopefully that gave you guys some things to get you out of a reading slump. Find those at your local library. Find an audiobook to listen to. Thrift something on eBay. That's where most of my books come from, honestly, is I just thrift them on eBay because all of those that I just mentioned were backlist titles. So hopefully you can find like a $5 copy on eBay or something. So you guys leave your recommendations in the comments as well if you've read like a relatively short book that you just thought was like grade A gold. Let us know. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.